From going through the most intense transformation to being seemingly unbeatable in the ring, here's why Jake Paul might actually defeat Nate Diaz. Let's get one thing straight here. Jake and Nate are fighting in a boxing ring. It's not MMA, and this gives a big advantage to the YouTuber turned boxer. You and I know Jake's becoming the next big thing in boxing. Yes, he lost his undefeated title when he faced Tommy Fury in the ring, but that doesn't mean we forget about all the times he's won. Jake sure knows a thing or two about boxing. He doesn't have 4 knockout wins for no reason. Nate, on the other hand, is fairly new to the game. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's a new fighter. That man is very accomplished in the UFC with 22 wins over the course of his career, but he doesn't have much experience when it involves a bunch of boxing gloves. Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz is actually the MMA star's boxing debut. Now, you tell me who's more likely to win here. A guy who's been training and boxing for the past couple of years, or a guy who's gonna fight pro boxing for the first time? Diaz doesn't have any prior experience, which makes his chances of winning against the influencer really slim. I mean, he's a good boxer by MMA standards. Even Andre Ward himself has spoken highly of the Stockton native's boxing skills. But again, this isn't MMA. Jake just fought a pro boxer earlier this year. Yeah, he fell short of him, but just going against a strong opponent gives you a lot of experience. He's fought Anderson Silva, Tyron Woodley, and Ben Askren. When he steps into the ring, he knows what he's doing, and that's what years of boxing have taught him, and that gives him the upper hand in this fight. Diaz shouldn't forget that when he steps into the boxing ring, his jiu-jitsu, kicking game, and all his MMA tricks are gone. They aren't gonna help him. Now, I'm not saying that he won't perform well in the ring. Of course he will. He's one of Paul's toughest opponents, and with the right training, he can go places. Just not in this fight though, because the stars are aligning for Jake. He's got too many advantages over the UFC star. Let's compare sizes. Jake Paul is much bigger than Nate Diaz. Yep, Diaz is at a distinct disadvantage here. It might surprise you, but he's almost as tall and long as his rival. What's the problem then? Well, Jake's an inch taller than the UFC star, but that, of course, doesn't make a lot of difference. It is the problem child's muscle mass that makes him significantly bigger than Diaz. They both have the same reach, but Paul weighs far more than his rival. Let's look at this weight. Paul weighs around 186 pounds, whereas Diaz weighs around 170 pounds. That's a 16-pound difference right there, and it's gonna favor the YouTuber during their fight. It's not only his size, but Jake's gonna be really tough for him in the ring. But the fact that he can match his range is gonna give him a tough time too. It's because Diaz won't be able to fight from a distance. Let me explain it to you. The MMA star's primary force of striking defense relies on his length and height. If you've seen some of Nate's fights, you know that he leans away from his opponent's punches. This causes them to overextend and expose themselves. Well, too bad for him. This trick doesn't work when you're fighting against an opponent who can match your reach. We saw McGregor learn this the hard way when he lost to Stockton's finest. Fighting long only works when you have a major height difference. Paul and Diaz are only separated by an inch, so the tricks that he uses against short guys will all go to waste. As if these advantages weren't enough for Paul, his knockout power is the cherry on top. I mean, the internet sensation is more powerful than any opponent Diaz has ever faced. The UFC legend has fought many great opponents throughout his career, but none of them possessed the knockout power that Jake Paul possesses. Jake Paul's knockouts are kinda out of this world. Yes, Diaz has fought Conor McGregor and Michael Johnson, and they are both powerful punchers. But let's not forget that they're both natural lightweights and undersized, even at welterweight. Jake knocked out Anderson Silva, who's a natural middleweight. If he can drop a former UFC middleweight champion, his power is more than enough to hurt a career lightweight. Not to mention, a lot of people think that Diaz has never been finished via strikes. That's not true, because he was TKO'd by Josh Thompson, and he was hurt several times by Jorge Masvidal too when the pair fought. The list of Diaz's disadvantages just keeps getting longer and longer, because it's not like his striking skills are over the top. Diaz is a pretty slow striker. If he wants to win this, he gotta take a few classes from Frankie Edgar. The 38-year-old athlete was never the fastest striker, and he's only becoming more sluggish. I mean, being the shorter guy in this fight, speed is like his only hope, and Diaz has little to no speed. Jake won't have any difficulty matching his quickness. I mean, his punches and kicks don't exhibit any kind of speed that would give him the upper hand. This also makes him a very hittable target, and I'm sure Jake would love it. Perhaps the biggest reason why Paul will win is Father Time catching up to the Stockton native. Diaz is only 2 years away from his 40th birthday, and that means he's past his prime. If you pay close attention to Nate's last MMA bouts, you can see him showing signs of aging, and it happens to everyone. Nate hasn't had back-to-back wins since 2016. I mean, he's had a great career. He was the first man to beat Conor McGregor, and we need to give him the credit, but it's all in the past now. Jake, on the other hand, he's thriving in his 20s. Being a young fighter, he's only gonna improve with time. Young fighters are like sponges in the gym. They learn and improve at a fast rate, but it's quite the opposite for old fighters like Diaz. I know he's making his boxing debut, but he won't be able to learn new tricks that easily. Plus, all the damages and injuries he's had over his career will catch up to him. The same can't be said for the former Disney star, because he's fairly new to the game. All of these reasons add up and favor Jake, who might actually defeat Diaz. And it's not just me who thinks that. Take it from Michael Bisping, who warned Diaz to not fight Paul. On an episode of his podcast, Believe You Me, he said, "With boxing gloves on, I don't think it will be a good idea for Nate Diaz." He went on to explain the same disadvantages that I did earlier in the video. Weight, size, you name it. He also did say that both the fighters were gonna make big bucks from this fight. And it's not only Michael who warned Nate. UFC standout Sean O'Malley told him to duck the fight too. But did he listen? Of course not. Diaz is set to face Paul on August 5th in Dallas, and this is easily becoming the most talked about fight of 2023. It's a big one for both of them, but Nate might just second guess this matchup. I mean, a lot of pros think it's a bad idea for him to box Jake Paul. You know it's bad when even Paul's biggest foe, KSI, thinks the content creators are gonna win. We all know how much KSI hates Paul, and him saying that has to mean something. On an episode of The Fighter versus the Writer, MMA star Matt Brown said he's, Jake, been knocking people out. And as a hittable southpaw, that's bad for Nate. If you're someone who thought Nate was gonna win easily, I fear I have to burst your bubble, because Jake's definitely got the upper hand in this one. That's all for why Jake Paul might actually defeat Nate Diaz.
And has done it from time to time, just hasn't been. Oh.